everyone, welcome to Easel Live. My name is Mo and I'm from Inventables, and I just want to give you guys a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, we're using a new camera, and we're not using Wi-Fi to do the stream, so I'm hoping there are a few improvements today with the video quality. Feel free to leave some feedback if you happen to notice that anything is better or worse, but little experimentation on this Friday. I am really excited about this Easel Live because we're talking about a whole bunch of things, and they're all related to how we can accomplish a flip mill. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with flip milling is the delicate art of carving on both sides of your material while also not screwing anything up in terms of alignment. So in theory, when I was first looking at doing flip milling, I was like, oh, this is really easy. And then I probably have tried to carve this project probably 5 or 6 times, trying to figure out the best way to teach it to all of you. So if you are somebody who's tried flip milling, you maybe have struggled with this for a little bit, you are not alone. But we are going to do our best to make it as easy as possible to do on X-Carve. Now with Carvey is actually very easy to flip mill, so we're gonna talk about that at the end. But I wanna start off by just talking a little bit about how I'm designing these files in Easel for X-Carve, and hopefully that's a good place for us to start. So the other cool thing that we're doing today to kind of work another element into this is not only are we flip milling, but we're going to be using Easel Pro. If some of you are watching our Instagram story earlier today, I carved up this little Mario question mark box with a cute little mushroom on the lid. So V-bits are what make a project like this possible. It allows us to engrave, get a really small, fine detailed engraving, and it allows us to carve these really nice 90-degree angles, so we can make a box that essentially doesn't use any tabs or any kind of dog bones or anything. So kind of just a unique product that you can make with V-bits and using Easel Pro. Now, if you are new to Easel Pro, don't worry. We're gonna go through a few things, but I'll mostly just point you in the direction of some resources that you can use. But using V-bits is an Easel Pro feature. And the cool thing about it is that anyone can design an Easel Pro project. So whether you have a machine, you don't have a machine, you can still design this project and you can see what it looks like and get a sense for how you might accomplish this. If you own an X-Carve or Carvey, as you probably know by now, because Easel Pro's been live for a couple weeks, you can carve up to 4 days each month for free. So you don't need to pay for a membership. It's completely accessible. Any 4 days of your choosing each month, you can choose to activate a free carving day, and you can go ahead and carve your project. So just because we're using Easel Pro, you're still able to design this and carve it out and see what it looks like. So since this project, we're gonna talk about some V-bits, we're gonna talk about Easel, we're gonna talk about X-Carve. I will be showing you guys something on the machine today. I won't be running it, but we'll get acquainted with a technique that we use in order to do flip milling. But before we do that, we're gonna design the whole project in Easel so that we have kind of a good place to start. And then as we go through it, I'll get into the flip milling and how that works its way in. So if you have any questions while I'm going through this, feel free to plug them into the chat, and I'll do my best to get to those at the end of the session. But for now, I'm just gonna try to get us into everything. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my Easel file with you guys. So what I have done is set up a file to get us started. And what I've done is I've just gone ahead and I've got this little design here that I've been using. We have loaded, if you haven't seen this yet, we have loaded some cool new icons in Easel that you can use that tessellate. So in other words, if you search for tile or if you search for pattern, you're gonna find these cool designs, which essentially will allow you to copy and paste a repeating pattern that connects, which is cool if you're trying to cover a big area. So this was the one that I selected. And then when I imported it, I just deleted a few of the elements because I was like, oh, that's a lot, it's kind of busy. So what I did is I just selected a few of those, and I ended up with this little shape here that I'm gonna use. So this way, you can see it over here in the simulate. What I've done is done this little tile, and this is gonna be what I use for my pattern on my design. So that's kind of what it's gonna look like. You can see that what I've selected here is a V-bit. So if you go to your bit selection menu, you can see we have 60-degree V-bits, 90-degree V-bits, or you can add your own style of V-bit and angle and everything like that. So for this particular project, we're going to use the 90-degree V-bit because that's going to allow us to carve out a square and have the edges come together to form a nice 90-degree angle like we did, like I just showed you on my little cube that I made. So for this project, we are going to be using the 90-degree V-bit. If you wanted to use the 60, you could do that, but you're going to end up with a different shape, and I'll show you what that looks like at the end. So the other thing that I'm doing for this particular project is my material dimensions. Right now, I'm just going to set to 12 inches by 12 inches, and I'm going to set it to a depth of 1/4 inch. Now, why is this 1/4 inch so important? Well, because I'm using a V-bit, it's really important to make sure that the depth of my cut does not exceed the depth of my material. And that's important because I need to make sure that those angles are going to fit together. So in this particular project that I'm using, I am going to be using 1/4 inch material, and that you can see is the total depth of cut for a 90-degree V-bit. If I were to use a material that's thicker than that, I'm going to have an issue because the bit's going to start carving with this flat part, and my joints are not going to fit together very smoothly because I'm going to have a little bit of a ridge. So you can use any material thickness up to 1/4 inch for making this box. So that's important to know. It's also important to note that even though I'm setting my material right now to 12 by 12, I will want to measure the actual width of my material before I carve my project. So because I'm not the best with math, full disclosure, I will not be using the actual material width right now, but I will be showing you how to account for that when I get to the end of my project design. So for now, I've got it set to a 12 by 12 and 1/4 inch thick, and I've got my bit set to a 90-degree V-bit. All right, all's looking good, and I got my little design in here that I want to use. So for this project, I'm gonna make a 2-inch square box. So we're gonna make the little box, and we're just gonna do it one side at a time. So here's my square. I just went ahead and imported a square from the square menu, and it's already set to 2 inches by 2 inches. That's awesome. Now, I'm gonna set it to an outline outside cut, and I'm gonna make sure that the depth goes all the way through. Now watch what happens as I change the depth. You see how the actual width of the square's cut changes? So that is because as a V-bit cuts down, it starts cutting with a different width of the bit. So at first, just if I carve just a little bit, I'm only carving with this part, but as I carve all the way through, this full width of the bit is going to be accounted for with my actual shape cut out. So that's why you'll see my shape kind of got wider as the cut got deeper. But for this project, I do want to make sure I cut the square all the way out of my material because, you know, I want to put my cube together. So I set it to outside cut. I also removed the tabs. The main reason I did that is because when I'm trying to get these joints to fit together really nicely, it can get a little bit tough to get the 90-degree angles to fit. If I've got a ridge or if I've got to like remove tabs, it just kind of gets a little sloppy. So I find if I use double-sided tape to hold my material down when I'm doing the cutout parts, that really makes a big difference. And the tabs, I don't have to worry about trying to remove them or gunking up my carve or anything like that. And it allows me to get like those really nice joints. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're thinking about tabs or no tabs, or if you have double-sided tape would be my recommendation for that. All right, so let's get back into Easel. Just want to show you what that looked like. And so I've got this, and the first thing I want to do is I want to align these two things together. So I'll select both shapes, and I will align the pattern to the square. I'm also going to bring the pattern to the front just so I can show you guys a few things that I'm going to be doing here. So what's important to remember is that the actual square, then when it cuts out, is not going to be just the white part that I see. Because of the way that the V-bit cuts, I'm actually going to have this ridge as well. Let me move this out of the way so it doesn't get all funky. So it's a little hard to visualize right now, but essentially this part with the beveled edge, the opposite side of that is still going to be exposed on the side of the side of the shape. So for instance, this is another tile that I cut out as I was doing my multiple design methods, trying to figure out how to make this work. So right now, this is kind of like what we see in Easel, right? We see, I know it's white, it's kind of hard to see, sorry guys. we see this beveled edge. We see like this surface, which is what we're seeing as the white part in Easel. And then everything that's cut here is actually indicated by that black line. So if you see, if I flip it over, the whole pattern extends to the edge of my design. So it's actually going to be basically like half the width of the bit I have to put on either side of the actual shape. So what's great about the way that Easel has set this up for me is that I just have to look at the bounding box, so that light blue line in Easel, to show me how far I need to stretch my pattern. So if I go to Easel again, and I click on this blue bounding box is the actual indication of where the center point of the V-bit is going to break through the material and give me my actual shape. So when I put this on, I just want to make sure that my design stretches to the edge of this bounding box in order to make sure that the whole design is going to be in the space that you see on the opposite side of the square. It might make a little more sense as we build the rest of the design, but I just wanted to let you kind of know what that looks like. So in other words, don't just put your design in this little white area. You want to make sure you go to the full outside, which in this case is 2.5, because the width of my cut pass is a 1/4 inch. So that means this whole tile is going to be shown on the other side when I cut it out. So I've got one. I know it took a bit, but we do have one side. So what I want to do is I want to align the very center of this square to the center of my material in the vertical center line of my material. So everything that we do here, we're going to align to the center this way, because when I flip my board, I'm going to flip it left to right. So I'm going to set my X center point. You can see I've selected the center point, and the X is to 6, because my total material width right now is 12 inches. Awesome. All right, we got one. Believe it or not, it does get easier from here. So I'm just going to move it down here for right now. And now that I've got that in there, I'm going to, oh, one other thing I wanted to note. Don't combine these shapes. We want to leave them separate because we're actually going to do 2 different cuts, one for the engraving and then one for the square cutout. So leave them unjoined. All right, hope I got that clear. So I'm going to select both of these, and I'm just going to use Control-C, Control-V on my keyboard to copy and make another one. So now I've got this other one, and I'm going to make one more. So I've got my 3, and this will be the 3 shapes that I want to carve. Now what's most important is that all the shapes are equidistant from the center of the material. So I need this shape and this shape to be the same distance along the x-axis from my 6 inches center of the material. So I'm going to move them both I'm going to move the center point of this shape 4 inches to the left of this center square, and I'm going to move this shape 4 inches to the right of this center square. So if I see here, this X is 6. So 6 minus 4, I want the center point of this square to be at 2 inches. And 6 plus 4 is 10. So I want the center point of this square to be at 10 inches. Now, visually, it's sometimes hard to see, like, are these lined up or are they not lined up? But you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, this distance seems like close to this distance. Let's say I accidentally put this at 9. You know, I can see pretty clearly that when I flip this over, that these 2 shapes aren't going to line up on either side when I flip it. So you can kind of get a sense from looking at it, but I find it's best to use the position tools just to make sure I get a really accurate, completely centered, equidistant from each other. So I've essentially already built half of my cube. Woohoo, that's great. So now I'm just going to copy all 3 of these. And again, I'm going to use Control-C and Control-V, and I'm going to copy 3 more. So now I have all 6 sides of my cube. So now that I have those all, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that the center point of these 3 is at 6 inches. So every time you select multiple shapes in Easel, it treats all of the position dimensions as a group. So since I copied from these, I know that these 3 are already aligned at the correct distance from each other. So I just need to make sure the center is at 6 inches. Another good way I can test this is I can select maybe all of these, and you can see that Easel tells me that these shapes are already center aligned. So that's a good way to say, okay, cool, all of my shapes are totally aligned in the vertical direction. And if I select them this way, oh, they're not aligned in the horizontal. Let's back it up. Forgot to do that. I'm gonna select them all. I'm gonna align horizontally. That's better. Now I'm gonna copy and paste and put these guys up here and set this to 6. Sorry about that, folks. So now I can see these are all still aligned in the horizontal and they're all still aligned in the vertical. In other words, right now, this shape is, the whole design is equidistant from the center point. So when I flip the board over from left to right, everything is going to be aligned correctly. Now, because this is a cube, I can save myself a little bit of carving time by not necessarily doing a design on every aspect of the cube, right? So on my little Mario cube that I made, I only put the question marks on the 4 sides that I knew people would see. I didn't carve anything on the bottom because it's just gonna take a little more time. And then on the top, I didn't carve anything, I just made like this little knob. Same with the white box that I made earlier. I made this little knob that's kind of like a little diamond piece. And I didn't carve my pattern on the front of it or on the top of it. I just carved it on the 4 different sides that I had. So I'll show you real quick. We'll just go ahead, we'll go back into Easel and we'll just set up our file so that we don't have to carve all of these. So I'll delete the pattern on 2 of these to account for the top and the bottom. And then these 4 shapes here will be the designs that I carve. Now, one thing I might be able to do, if you haven't used the new Easel Pro features, you can add in new fonts using Easel Pro. We got a ton of them to select from. And because I'm gonna be already using VBits, I can still use an Easel Pro font as well because that comes as part of my free carve day. So I really liked this Limelight font. And you can see I clicked the install button and I had installed it into my font library. And now when I open it up, I see the Pro icon that tells me it's an Easel Pro font. So I think for this box, I'm just gonna write the word tiny, because it's a little tiny box. And I'll put that on the lid of my box. Now for the fonts, again, you can kind of do whatever you'd like. Remember, as long as it's inside the bounding box of the square, you should be all set in terms of the actual carve. So for this one, it's overlapping into the black a little bit, but because of how I'm gonna carve the file, it's gonna turn out just fine. So I'll make sure that my tiny text is also centered at 10 inches. So it's centered on the square here. And so that's gonna be the little box that I make. If you wanted to make a knob, you could also add in a circle and just do like an outside. Again, just cut all the way through and I would remove the tabs. And we might wanna make it just a little bit smaller since we wanna make sure it actually fits on the lid of our box. So what's cool is that with a knob, you can just do 2 of the same shape and you don't actually need to center these any particular place in the material because you're gonna carve them both out at the same time and then glue them back to back. So what does that mean? So this shape that I carved out is the diamond piece that I did. I just carved 2 of these little diamond pieces, and then once I had them, I just glued them back to back, and that's how I got my little knob on there. So that's kind of a neat trick, is you don't actually have to do any centering with the knob. You just have to make the shape twice. So let's get back into Easel. There's just a few more things I want to cover. And let's go ahead and share that. And okay, so I got my knob, everything's lined up. Now the most important thing that I mentioned earlier is that it's very unlikely that the width of my material is really gonna be 12 inches. It just doesn't seem very possible. There's always variances in terms of wood and even some of the acrylics and stuff that we sell, there is a slight tolerance on a lot of those. So sure enough, when I measured this piece of material, I actually found that the true width of my material was 12.313. Really great fraction for someone like me who doesn't like math to work with, which is part of why I find it easiest to design the file with a really round number that's easy for me to think about in terms of different dimensions when I'm lining everything up. But you can see that because the width of my material is now bigger, that my board, my design is not truly centered on this material. Good news, I can select everything, go up here to edit, and hit center to material. So what that did is it took all of my shapes and it centered it to my whole 12 by 12.313 inch piece of material. So now I know that the x-axis is centered along this material, and it's also centered in the y direction as well if you wanted to make sure that that was an important part of your flip milling process. So once you've got everything designed, you can use this centered to material feature in Easel to make sure that your whole design, everything is equidistant, the whole design is then centered on the piece of material you are using. Now, if you're looking to save material, that's fine. You can just make sure that you remember the 6.157, and maybe you just decide you want to carve everything down like at the bottom of your material. So you can save the rest of this material for another project. It's just most important to make sure that the x-axis stays the same. If you want, you can always just take your material dimension, your true width, divide it by 2, and make sure all of your parts are centered there. So 6.157 is half of 12.313. So that's another way that you can go about doing that. So now that I have my project built, I want to actually position it so that it's ready to carve. So if I were to carve this project right now, as you can see from the detailed preview, it's not really going to look right, because what I'm going to end up with are a bunch of pieces where the engraving is on the inside of the tile, which is not at all what I want to do. I want a piece where the engraving is on the wider side of the square, or basically the other side of the square. But I had to design the file this way to make sure that everything aligned correctly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate 2 of these work pieces. Now, why am I doing 2 of them? Well, I find it's easiest if I decide I want to make a change, like maybe I want to change this word or something like that. It helps to have an original piece that I know works, and then I can do like fuddling here and just reduplicate this original piece if I want to do that. So to make things easier, I'm going to rename this one original. If I can spell it, there we go. So this is like my original work. This one I'm going to rename engraving, because I'm only going to use the engraving aspect on this one. And this one I'm going to rename cutout. So this is only going to be where I cut out the shapes. So if I go to the one that I've titled engraving, I'm going to delete everything that I don't want to engrave. So in this case, it's going to be select everything. I'm going to deselect my engravings because they're on top. That's a little bit easier. The way I'm doing this is I'm just holding Shift on my keyboard when I select the shapes that I want to deselect. And then I'm going to delete all the cutouts. Now, I also don't want to move anything once I've done that. So because I duplicated the original piece, I know that these shapes on this piece here will align with the cutouts. So I'm going to delete the engravings from my cutout file. And because I designed everything from one original file and I duplicated the work pieces, all of these work pieces are in the correct alignment when I go to carve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, engrave all of my shapes. So I'm going to go to the machine, turn on the V-bit, and I'm going to engrave all of my shapes. So that's where flip milling gets a little bit tricky, because how do you know when you flip the piece over that your piece is going to be in the right place? That is why one of the most useful parts about flip milling, and one thing that you really want to keep in mind, and what we have designed for you, is a jig that you can use on your X-Carve to make flip milling easier. Said I wouldn't do this, but we are going to get jiggy with it. Na 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 na. I'm getting looks. Okay, but jigs are what makes this so easy to do on X-Carve, because it means you can make sure you properly align your material in the same spot when you go to flip it over. So we have made this jig for you guys to use, and recommend cutting out the jig before you do anything else, because you want to make sure it fits on your machine and it's like the right thing for your machine, because you might want to make some modifications. Maybe you find it doesn't work in your particular application, you want to make some changes. So if you go to our projects page, we have made a flip milling bracket project for you guys, and here's what the jig looks like. It allows you to mount directly to the threaded inserts on your wasteboard so that you can quickly and easily flip over the piece of material and not have to worry about getting it aligned in the exact same spot when you do it. So you can open up this file in Easel, and I'd recommend cutting it out with any bit smaller than 1/8 inch. but an 1/8 inch would work for this particular application. So go ahead, you can open up this file, cut it out. I would use tabs on the jig because you want to make sure that the jig doesn't move. You want it to make sure that it carves out accurately. These holes here are what align to the correct distance for the threaded inserts on all sizes of the X-Carve's wasteboard. So they're just the important part to make sure that you have properly, aligned to each other. You can see here the shapes are actually grouped. So if you wanted to just take these 3 dots and design your own jig that works, you can go ahead and do that. And the other important part that is a little hard to see, but you want to make sure you have this little part carved out in the corner so that when you put in a piece of square material, it's able to get into this little nook and properly line up against these 2 kind of square parts of the jig, I guess. So basically your material can truly be aligned correctly. So this is something I've never done before, but we're gonna take the camera off of my computer and I just wanna take you to the X-Carve real quick to show you what this looks like. So it might be a little wobbly. I hope nobody gets sick, but here we go. So right now I'm in the maker room in our office. And what's cool about the maker room is we have an X-Carve here that we can use for our own personal projects, which is great. And what I've done is I've attached the jig to the threaded inserts here on my wasteboard. Now, I've used 2 of our green clamps to mount it to the threaded inserts, but I've also used an M5 screw. The reason I use an M5 screw is because when I am zeroing my bit, I want to make sure I can really see this point here where everything kind of comes together. And the screw can sometimes get in the way of the bit getting close enough to that corner. So using an M5 screw is a great way to make sure that you're able to quickly and easily see what's going on when I go to zero my machine. Now this one is a little dirty, this project, because I left the double stick tape on it. But let's say this is how I was carving my project. So you can see I've got a design here that I milled first. And so basically, I milled this project. Oh, you can use clamps too. Make sure you use clamps. The jig does not act as a clamp. It really only acts as a mechanism in which you can align your material correctly and securely, like in the same spot. So you can see there's still plenty of threaded inserts around here that I can use to mount my material to the wasteboard so it doesn't move. But I would also recommend, if you have it, double-sided tape for both sides or one or the other side. Really helps make a difference. So I've got my material secured, hypothetically, with some clamps and stuff, and I've carved out my squares, I've carved out my pattern. So right now I've got my pattern carved. Now when I go to flip this, I'm just gonna go ahead and flip it left to right. Now the reason it's important I flip it left to right is because remember I've lined everything up down the vertical center of my material, which means if I were to flip it, let's go back to this. If I were to flip it front to back, it really doesn't do me any good because I've not lined up all my shapes to flip along this axis. I've only lined up this particular easel file, I've only lined up to flip this way. So I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to complete my second carve, which is the cutout file, and I'm going to cut out these squares. You can see the squares cut out really nicely, and on this particular one, I did my little diamond shapes because I kind of like the way that now looks. So now, when I am all done, you can see I had used a double-sided tape to keep my squares from moving when I carved. So now when I'm all done, let's see if I can pop one out. There it goes. It's not going to look super great because I didn't finish it. But now you can see that I've got the whole shape carved out. Let's try and do one that has the pattern on it, shall we? No finishing touches here, guys. All one-handed. Hope I get a little bit of street cred for this. So you can see that the pattern comes all the way to the edge. Bring it a little closer. Pattern comes all the way to the edge, and I've got it on both. I've been able to mill both sides correctly. So that is that's flip milling. that's flip milling on your X-Carve. And for Carvey, you can essentially design your file the exact same way. The one nice thing about Carvey is that Carvey has a smart plan. So Carvey eliminates the need for the jig because you've already got sort of a jig built into it. And as long as you can make sure that you home in the correct spot, pretty much just designing the file the same way. And that's that. You could also try to, carve this without a jig. From personal experience, I can tell you it's a lot harder to do that, because in order to figure out like how to flip the material the right way, and even if you use the guides on the wasteboard, I still didn't find it as effective as just using the jig. The other thing I wanted to cover with two-stage carves, because technically this is a two-stage carve, right? You do the engraving and then you do the cutout, and you have to flip the material in the meantime. So what I do when I do this particular one is that I don't have to do anything with the bit. That's what makes V-Bit so great for this particular cube project, because I'm able to carve the engraving with the V-Bit, and then I use the same bit to cut those 90-degree angles and be able to get it done that way. Now, if you do use the two-stage carve feature, maybe you are using a flip mill. Okay, sorry guys, something weird happened with our connection. I apologize about that. If I do something with maybe a flat bit first, and then I use the V-bit, it's important that you make sure your machine doesn't move when you do that, because you don't want anything to get misaligned in your X or Y axis. So when you're doing a two-stage carve, and I think we've covered two-stage carves before, so hopefully this isn't too unusual for you, but let's go back into here, and let's just say I went with a two-stage carve. So for this particular one, let's change this to just an 1/8 inch. It's not gonna look great, because these patterns probably don't look too great with an 1/8 inch, and then these I'm gonna do with the 90. I would still set it up so that this knew that this was done with an 1/8 inch. And then when I go to hit carve, the carve menu will actually show a place for you to lock the motors. And I can't show that to you right now because I have no USBs on my computer. But I believe in the support center, if I do two-stage carve, I'm sure some of you guys have seen this if you've done two-stage carves in the past, but it does have a spot for you to lock the motors and unlock the motors. So when I'm going to change the bit from the 1/8 inch bit to the V bit, I wanna make sure I hit this lock motors button. So basically, I'll carve everything with the 1/8 inch bit, I'll pull the carve menu back up just so I can lock the motors. I'll go ahead and I'll lock the motors, I'll change the bit, then I will go ahead, set up my file so that I can carve the cutout part with the V-bit. So it's a little bit trickier. It's kind of why I would recommend, if it's possible, to do everything with the V-bit. It does make things a little bit easier. But if you're doing some kind of flip milling project where you, for some reason, don't want to use a V-bit, or you're just making like a regular Easel flip milling file, that's probably the best way to go about doing that. That is everything I have for you guys today. I hope it was somewhat thorough in terms of good ways to flip mill. I think the jig makes this a lot easier, and I did a lot of research on a forum. There's a lot of great information there for other ways to flip mill if you don't feel like using a jig. But if you do want to use a jig and just kind of try it out, check out that Easel file on our project section. We'll put it in the Easel Live project, so you can just quickly and easily go in there and open it up. And then all kinds of different boxes. Christmas is coming, guys, so gotta make a lot of boxes. You can have like the most custom gift boxes that you could possibly make, making your own boxes this way. So that's one application for flip milling, is making a little cube square, but there are a lot of other things you can do with flip milling that I hope you guys check out. Which reminds me, there is a contest posted in our forum right now. Our friend Peter at New Brit Workshop has just finished putting together his 750 millimeter X-Carve, and he's opened up a contest to viewers to earn a $50 gift card. So if you get into the contest, if you're watching this video before January 31st of 2018, you can go to the forum, search for Easel contest, and you'll see there's a giveaway for a $50 gift card for being able to replicate his Easel project, or he made a project in VCarve Pro. So if you can replicate his project in Easel and send us a screencast, share that in the forum, and you have a chance to win a $50 gift card. And we will pick the coolest picture frame replication of his project and send you guys a $50 gift card. So check that out in the forum if you're interested in taking your flip milling skills to another level. And if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us at help@inventables.com. I know the chat has been very busy today, so thanks everyone for participating in that. And if you guys have any other questions or concerns, let us know what you'd like to see for another Easel Live, and I hope to see you guys again soon. All right, have a good Thanksgiving for all you Americans out there. Thanks, bye.